welcome to the Earth Trust. Welcome to this Supporters Day. I'd also like to welcome people who are online. Haven't had to do that all day, but we are live streaming the event today for all the people who couldn't attend. So it's really lovely to see you. This is a slightly different event from 2 years ago, isn't it? But as I said, there's plenty of space. We're having to put in place all sorts of COVID restrictions that we haven't before. I've got a couple of jobs in this introduction. One is to say this is also the rose ceremony. So I will be handing over in about 20-25 minutes, depending on how long I go on for. And you will be able to participate in the annual rose ceremony, which marks the exchange of a rose between Oxfordshire County Council and the Earth Trust. And it's very symbolic. The symbolism is about giving the Earth Trust, or the Earth Trust giving people access to the Whitnam clumps. I do wonder whether 40 years ago, when the first rose ceremony was put in place, whether or not the people who put it in place really realised the implications of that arrangement. I trust so. So there are a couple of other things I want to do during my talk. I want to thank you. I want to thank you all for your support throughout the pandemic. And I also want to give you a flavour into the importance of the Earth Trust now and in the future. So the world has changed. The world has changed markedly since 2 years ago, when I didn't actually stand here, but I stood in another location and talked to you about the trust and our importance. And you will all know how it's changed. It's impacted on all our lives. It's impacted on communities, and it's impacted across the world. And this impact has been in the form of a health crisis. And for the Earth Trust, what that has translated into is it's demonstrated inequalities in access. I think the health crisis, the pandemic, has shown inequalities across our society, which we need to address. But for us particularly, inequalities in access to green spaces. So the second crisis that has been with us for a long time is the ecological crisis. But I think it's only now that we're beginning to really face up to the fact that the things we've been putting in place to address the ecological crisis haven't been working. And we're beginning to think seriously and differently about our habitats, our species, and our landscapes. So moving on from the ecological crisis, which has been with us for a long time, we have also been having a major impact on our planet. It's us that's been impacting and causing a rise in temperature across the globe. And it's us that's got to do something about it. So when you hear, I don't know whether you heard the news this morning, but there was a big conversation about whether or not we are able to achieve the targets in the timescale, the carbon targets, the net zero targets in the timescales that we really need to achieve them in. And I think that conversation is live, it's active. We're beginning to see changes across government in terms of legislation that's coming in, both in terms of the Agriculture Bill and the Environment Bill. These are real tangible changes that are happening right now. But as I said, we need to face the future and we need to be thinking differently. And I just wanted to use the example of great crested newts. We have one of the largest populations of great crested newts in the country here at Little Whitnam, in Little Whitnam Wood. We have shifted over the last 20 or 30 years from thinking about that as being a species that we can protect in its own right to thinking about the habitats in which it resides. So thinking about the ponds, where it doesn't spend a lot of its time, but also thinking about the woodlands and the grasslands that surround it. And we have, in effect, over the last 20 or 30 years, demarcated those boundaries. And we've called these really special sites, we've called sites of special scientific interest. But our impact on the ecosystems has changed markedly over time. And those sites, which were always pristine, have got smaller or less impactful in terms of their ability to look after those habitats and species. So we need to think bigger. We need to think landscape scale. We need to think water catchment. We need to think ecosystems. We need to think what's happening that you can see above the ground in terms of those ecosystems. But we also need to think what we can't see below ground. And the second thing that's beginning, I think, to become a reality to those people who are working in the environmental sector is that it's people who make decisions about the environment, about the climate, about ecosystems, about green spaces. And putting people at the heart of sustainability is going to be what we need to do if we are going to face up to the challenges that we need to. The Earth Trust has always done this. We've always championed for people to be put at the heart of not only decision making, but also being put at the heart of policies and practice. The Earth Trust has always been important, and green spaces have always been important for people. This particular green space here receives normally more than 200,000 visits a year. So we receive more free visits than almost any site, any other free-to-access site across the southeast. But what the pandemic has shown is that people actually want to get out. They want to get out and they want to enjoy these green spaces. And they need to get out for their own health and well-being. And as a result of those people getting out, we want to welcome them. We've seen a significant increase in visitor numbers to our green spaces. It has been challenging. I'm not going to say that it hasn't, and I really appreciate all the support of our volunteers over the last 18 months who've been tirelessly looking after those green spaces. One of the things I'm really proud of is that we recognise the importance of green spaces to people very early on in the pandemic, and we have kept our green spaces open, but under immense pressure. I talked about increasing visitor numbers. These visitors don't all walk to us, unfortunately. They don't all cycle to us. They do drive their cars. We're quite a remote location here. Along with the visitor numbers, we have seen a tangible challenge to the infrastructure we already have. So we always had challenges to our infrastructure, and by that I mean access tracks, I mean access roads, I mean car parking, I mean lack of toilets. But I have to get toilets into every conversation I have, by the way. Everybody will know that. So this poor quality infrastructure, if I can put it like that, has been put under immense pressure and shown that actually we seriously have to do something about it. So people have increased they are increasing their use of green spaces, and rightly so. So that's the first thing. That's a pretty big thing that's really important about the Earth Trust. The second thing which we've really been able to do, and actually has surprised us over the last 12 or 18 months, is that we've been able to build this building. And when we were thinking about this building, we were thinking that we wanted to give people a vision into the future, a vision into sustainability, a sustainable future for everyone. And when we began thinking about the design and construction, we were looking big scale in terms of the impacts of carbon and ecology. I am really grateful to the team who've really made this happen. If this was going to be a difficult build in a normal set of years, it became even more difficult going through COVID. And I won't go into the ins and outs and the challenges along the way, but believe me, these two guys over here, who are pictured on screen, am I allowed to say you got a little bit more grey as we went? But I am grateful to all our partners, both through the design and the construction. And when we were first thinking about the design, and as we moved through the design process and then into the build, we as a trust are always thinking about future sustainability, but also about how we can engage people more deeply, more meaningfully in what we're doing. So the building itself is constructed with timber, with glulam beams. So we're talking about a natural resource, but we're also talking about being able to lock in carbon. This particular building has to be really strong because over the top of it is a wildflower meadow roof, which I understand is heavier than a normal roof. And the wildflower meadow roof actually enables us to establish this building within its place, within its landscape. So the fact that the curvature of the roof mimics the Whitnam clumps establishes it and its place. The curvature of the roof also gives us another important aspect, which is that people can actually see it. So if it was a flat roof up there, nobody would be able to see it. Nobody would be able to notice the change in seasons. But by bringing it down, people will be able to have that experience. Other things that are really important are water and energy. So water, how water moves through the building is really important. It's not just about turning on the tap, it's about how water gets to that tap. And water is going to be one of those resources that's going to be in demand. It's in demand now, it's difficult now, it's going to get worse in future as we head towards or as we develop through and face up to our changing climate. So everything that we do is about access and engagement. And we've taken the same principles of looking at the climate emergency, looking at the ecological emergency, looking at the health emergency. We've also been applying those same principles, those same goals to the Earth Trust farm. So thinking about how we can manage the land more sustainably, thinking about and actually acting on and developing regenerative agricultural techniques, thinking about how we might change in future in order to lock up more carbon, or how our soils are managed. So Earth Trust is a big thinker, it's a whole system thinker, it's an ecosystem thinker. We've also taken the same thinking and we're applying it to a new partnership with the Environment Agency that we've consolidated over the last 12 months, where we're going to be working on the Oxford Flood Alleviation Scheme and just thinking about these emergencies, thinking about access to green space, hopefully putting in place green lungs, accessible green lungs for the city of Oxford. It won't have escaped your notice that during the pandemic we haven't been able to do the hands-on, face-to-face activities we would have done before. So we thought creatively about the archaeological work that was underway, taken that online and reached out to global audiences actually, bringing the history of this landscape, of this historic landscape to life. We were bitterly disappointed that we just couldn't cope last year with River of Life 2, as well as doing everything else. But we're really delighted that we've kept up the planning and the pressure, and we have started to dig River of Life 2. This is little kit. When you're digging a big wetlands, you need big kit, and I'm pleased to say that the big kit is well on its way. So this is an enormous new wetland on the banks of the River Thames with new partners, and it's great to see it happening. Going back to the emergencies, the crises that I've been explaining, it does feel a bit, I don't know how it feels to you, but it feels like we're in a race. We've got to get there, and we've got to get there fast. And looking at both the climate, let's look at the climate emergency first. So what we're actually aiming for with the climate emergency is we need to have more proactive environmental decisions made. The decisions that are going to be made are going to be yours and mine and the governments, everybody, communities, everybody will be making decisions, and we need them to make ones that are really going to contribute to our 3 emergencies. Contribute, wrong word. Address, face up to, find solutions to these 3 emergencies. When we're thinking about the ecological emergency, as I said, we need to think big. We need to think nature recovery, but nature recovery on a much bigger scale than we're used to. And we need to think nature-based solutions. So River of Life 2 is a wetland creation project. The Oxford Flood Alleviation Scheme is another wetland creation project. And these are big in scale and they address the emergencies that we're faced with. And now let's just remind ourselves about the health crisis and what the Earth Trust has experienced and what we need to do in future. So in terms of the health crisis, we really do need to be giving people access to nature's health service for their health and their mental well-being. And what all these 3 have in common, hope you've spotted this, is people. All these 3 emergencies will require people to think differently, to support in a different way, to make different decisions. And part of that is about rethinking access and what we think about access. I think most people think, and I probably thought exactly the same way, that by putting a path through a green space, I was giving people access, we were giving people access to the natural world. So in a normal day when I'm at home, I really do like breaking my day and going for a walk. I tend to take my dog with me because if I left her behind, she wouldn't like it. And my day is quite busy. I've got lots of emails. I struggle with finding that 45 minutes or an hour. So what do? I've got my dog, I'm in green space. I've also got my phone with me and I'm working on my phone as I'm going through my walk or as I'm walking. Now what that means, am I engaging with nature? No, I'm not really, am I? I'm using it, I'm not engaging with it, I'm not connecting with it. So what we need to think about is how we establish greater connections between people and nature. And that's why we need to think about rethinking our access. You don't have to take my word for it. There's been a lot of work done between English Nature, Natural England, slip of the tongue, that shows my age, and the University of Derby, so Professor Miles Richardson. And what they've done is they've looked at how we can connect people with nature. And there are 5 pathways that they've identified. And these 5 pathways, I won't go through all of them, but these 5 pathways will enable, if we include these 5 pathways, you don't have to include all 5, you'll be pleased to know. If we include some of these 5 pathways in our programs, our projects, our access opportunities, then we will be beginning to make those connections. People who are taking part will be able to make those connections, whereas they probably haven't done so before. So this is about senses, and so the first one is about senses, and these are not hard. So if you're experiencing green space, what you could do is watch the clouds, or you could smell the flowers. These are not difficult things to do by using your senses. Another way of doing it is through appreciating the beauty of the natural world and then translating it into either art or music or drama, but engaging with it in a positive way, in a proactive way. It could be an emotional thing. where your emotions are raised as a result of what you're seeing and you're experiencing. It might be something to do with meaning. So a lot of people don't actually notice the change in seasons, for instance. Less than 14% of people actually celebrate or mark the summer solstice. So you're amongst the really special people who are actually noticing the change of seasons through this event, and you're also beginning to connect, if you hadn't done so already, with the natural world. And then compassion. And I think compassion is a really interesting one. Compassion is about if you care for what you are experiencing, if you, through that proactive engagement, if you care about it, you're more likely to look after it. So now, those of you who know me will know that I never go very far without this guy, or at least his image and a couple of quotes. But I have to say that I haven't told him this, but I don't actually agree with the ordering of this quote. And I want to just look at the last part of it. So this quote is, "No one will care about what they have never experienced. No one will care about what they haven't experienced." And then I think it should be the first part of this quote. So no one will protect what they don't care about. So if you haven't experienced it, you won't care. And if you don't care, you won't protect it. And what we need to do is we need to have greater connections with the environment. We need to establish those connections. And through those connections, we need to be changing from users of the environment to people who care for it and therefore make pro-environmental decisions, good environmental decisions. So what does this mean for us? Well, what can I summarise in terms of the Earth Trust and what we will be wanting in the future? And I've sort of grouped these into 3 bubbles. So we need more green spaces. The green spaces we've got, they're not enough. We need people to, I've talked about the fact that we've got inequalities in our green spaces. So having green spaces or having nature close to where people live is the best solution. And building those green spaces into those developments is the best solution. So we need to look after what we've got, but we need more and we need better quality. We need to be thinking, and the Earth Trust is thinking and is acting to enable us to think bigger and more connectedly around nature recovery and also around the climate emergency. So I talked about the farm, I've talked about River of Life. What we need to be thinking about is not just the ecosystems that are created and rejuvenated as a result of those projects, but thinking about how we can make it better and at a bigger scale and how we can share that understanding. And finally, this is the third bubble, is about the green recovery, but it's also about health and well-being and the green recovery. And for us, it's about not just having those green spaces in place, but establishing those connections. So we will be looking at these 5 pathways. We will be looking at how we can better connect people to the natural world. And we'll be wanting to bring that to life. So it'll be about exciting people. It'll be about engaging more people. So finally, I just want to more or less summarise where we've got to as an organisation and the exciting journey that we're on. So we're thinking very differently. We're thinking at a different scale. We're thinking climate. We're thinking nature. We're thinking health and well-being. And those 3 things are really driving us. But we're also thinking people. We're thinking that people are going to be the thing that makes all this happen. I'm I'm so pleased, delighted and thankful that you have all supported us over the last 18 months, whether it's through volunteering your time, whether it's through being a trustee, whether it's making a donation, being a friend. We wouldn't have survived if you hadn't given your energy and passion. So my first thing is to say thank you for that. My second thing is to say we've got some really exciting projects and ideas planned, and we need your help to help bring those to life in the future. So thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed what you've heard today. Later on, you'll be given an opportunity to go to 3 different groups of projects to hear more about the Earth Trust and what we are doing now and what we've got planned. So I think, I'm not sure, but I think we've got an opportunity for a couple of questions, Leanne. A brief opportunity. And Ruth's got a microphone just in case there are any questions.
Jane, can I just illustrate very quickly one of the things you said about the challenge to biodiversity, that you're one of the partners in the Yellow Wagtail project that I'm leading. And the very brief story is that in 1951 there were 500 nests of house martins under Clifton Hampton Bridge. 500 nests is 1,000 adult birds. Last year, the biggest flock I saw in a high wind in the lee of a wood, probably all the local birds to Clifton Hampton, was 30 birds, 1% of what there was in 1951. Now, what has happened? Part of it's on migration. If you build a mud nest, you probably don't like your nest to be shaken every 5 seconds, so they'd be nesting somewhere else. They'd have moved from the bridge anyway. But a very large part of the story is almost certainly that the little insects which come out of all the water meadows up and down the river there have gone, and I'm trying to research that. Now, just to link that to what's happening today in the news, you've mentioned today in the news, ivermectin. Who had heard of ivermectin before the last couple of days? It's being used as a treatment, an unproven treatment for COVID around the world. Now, it's been used for a very long time, very effectively, as a nematicide to get rid of gut parasites in cattle and sheep. And there's growing evidence now that where the pastures have been contaminated with ivermectin, there's less in the way of soil invertebrates. So there's a link. Now we've got a massive increase around the world in people taking this. It goes through them into the sewage system. And where does that water go? Well, our meadows actually draw water. The meadows on the river here were still moist at the end of June last year. 3 months of drought, and you still had surface moisture in those meadows because they're drawing water from the river. So all our sewage goes down there, and the chemicals in that sewage are contaminating those meadows. So I'm just illustrating, it's a huge problem we've got, but it's one we can bring back down to some very particular examples of that complexity and start to try to pick pieces out. I've said enough, but thank you for the opportunity to talk about, you know, what is a tremendous joy to me. This is a partnership with our family farm and the Earth Trust and Wild Oxfordshire and some others coming on as well.
I think that's a really good example of big system thinking or multiple system thinking, thinking whole ecosystem, which is what we need to do more of. But it's complicated. It's not a straight line. You can't take one thing and fix it, because that one thing that might fix it might be impacting something else. Thank you, Robin. That's really good. Are there any other questions?
Quick one. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you have a fantastic facility here, and I'm really very pleased to be invited today to see it again. I did see it when it was under construction, but the thing that troubles me is the access, as you've mentioned before. The most practical way for most people to get here is by car. What I'd very much like to see is a cycle route from Dewcott Station, actually. Robin, I've just been talking to him about this, he thought that there might be some plans in the offing for looking at that. I wonder if you knew any more about it than I do.
So I mean, I think you know that we've got big plans in terms of access and car parking and sustainable transport and links with Didcot, if we can. So yeah, we need to be thinking about the system here. We need to be thinking about sustainable links. So not just how do we protect and enhance and give people access to this particular location, how do we spread them across the farm? We've got 500 hectares here, not just the Whitnham clumps. We've got lots of things to engage people in, but thinking about how people get here and how we can encourage more sustainable access. But it will need partnerships. The Earth Trust can't possibly do this on our own. I mean, we provide this huge resource for people across South and Vale. I'll just make that plug. Huge resource for people across the South and Vale. And if, in order to really bring this big vision to life, we need support.
Yep.
So there's a lot of willingness there. But the Earth Trust has been under huge pressure over the last 18 months.
Wow. Yeah, very much so. Oh well, we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, good. Thank you. So I think, I'm told. So now we're moving on to the rose ceremony itself. Councillor Howden, if you would like to step forward.
Stand on the mark. I've got a prepared speech, which is a usual pretty boring thing, but after an inspiring talk like that, I think I'll probably jettison most of that and say a few extempore words. One of the things that struck me about that was that there's another contribution I'd like to make, which is the lost words. There's a very famous book that somebody wrote a few years ago with some poems and drawings in it about lost words in nature, whether it's linnets and larks or curlews or caterpillars. We have lost a huge number of words which our children no longer understand. And I think the great success of this building, and I believe you had your first education group on the 11th of June, is that we will be able to educate the next generation of children in so many of these things which are so vital to us in carrying on into the future. And I was struck by the phrase, nature's health service. I think it is absolutely crucial, and it has become crucial that the amount of time that you can spend outside, however short, is a bonus. And it's a bonus to people's mental health. I mean, I'm very privileged. I live in the middle of Oxford. But you can live in the middle of Oxford and you can be no more than 5 minutes away from a field of cows or the heron on the Thames or all sorts of other great natural resources. And I think that is, because we live in the most rural county in the southeast of England, something that's very important. And it is great to see more of you here this year than there would have been under other circumstances had we been further locked down. And I mourn the fact that I thought last year might have been your 50th, because my background notes told me that the whole thing started in 1970. So I thought it was really unfortunate that last year was wiped out. And the rose ceremony started because under contract law, you need something to actually make a contract work. And the concept of peppercorn rents grew up in English contract law. Whether that was because people gave peppercorns or because that was a small thing, I don't know. But in this particular instance, what started with Berkshire and transferred to Oxfordshire in local government reorganisation in 1974 was centred around the giving of a rose as the rent for the access to Whittenham clumps. And I'm delighted to be able to do that in a few minutes. As you know, the rose has played a very important part in English history. We only have to think about the Wars of the Roses, so inaccurately represented by Shakespeare. And then I grew up with a very important rose in my early life. And that was the rose that was grown in France during the 1930s and smuggled out at the beginning of the Second World War, and was handed to those people that formed the start of the what was to become the United Nations. And that was the rose that was then called Peace. And it's not Peace that we're giving today, it's another shrub rose called Princess Alexandra. And this is another rose that has an interesting history behind it. The Princess Alexandra rose comes from Queen Alexandra in Denmark in 1912, I think it was. She discovered that there was a Danish priest who was selling roses so that the proceeds could be used to help for health care for the poor. And that trust still exists, that charity still exists, and still works primarily in London with providing health care and other resources for people who do not have access to it. And indeed, £2.50 of the rose that I present today will go to that trust. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here today. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with so many of you representing the trustees, the volunteers, the chairs of the 2 district councils, and many other groups of people. And so with that, I would like to present the rose, which my PA is going to give me, and I believe I am going to present to Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure we're allowed to shake hands, are we? Thank you very much, Councillor House, and thank you so much for that. And thank you in particular for the recognition that the rose represents for the access that we provide, the Earth Trust provides to the people of Oxfordshire and the south of England to this wonderful green space and the other green spaces that we manage. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And I forgot to say the other thing that was in the news today, of course, is the announcement about the Chilterns area of outstanding natural beauty and the extension. I'm disappointed that the government didn't take the Glover Review's suggestion that the Chilterns should become a national park with all the extra protections that that would have brought, but I'll settle for a bigger ANOB.
Thank you. Okay, I've only got 2 other things to do before we all split up and have a look around these wonderful facilities. The first one is to reiterate Jane's thanks to you all for being here today, and thanks to all the volunteers and the supporters throughout the last year, in particular the last year, but over the last few years. And as Jane says, we couldn't really do any of this without you, so we're incredibly grateful for your support and help for that. And then the last thing I want to do is just to pay tribute to Jane and the team, the staff here, for what an amazing job they've done over the last 18 months, not just surviving the pandemic and keeping the ship afloat and keeping it all going, but actually putting this building up and the Earth Innovation building and all the other things like the River of Life, planning all of that and moving the trust forward in a time when we could very easily have moved backwards. So thank you to Jane and thank you to the team for an amazing job you've all done. Thank you.